The Galactic Senate was no ordinary hall. Suspended in orbit above a pulsar, it was the crown jewel of diplomacy, a colossal dome of crystal and steel, shimmering with starlight. Hundreds of alien species gathered in structured rows, each representing their planet, empire, or hive mind, with impeccable decorum. No shouting, no chaos. Only law, order, and ancient tradition. At the center hovered the High Chancellor, a translucent being of energy, radiating calm authority. Today's agenda: resolving territorial disputes between the Clorax Confederacy and the Trinari clans. Tension buzzed in the air, yet it was the good kind. The kind that came with responsibility. And then, it happened. The giant doors boomed open. Everyone turned. A lone human walked in, barefoot. Wearing American flag swim trunks, sunglasses, and dragging a massive crocodile behind him, with what looked like duct tape. Gasps echoed. One ambassador fainted. Another choked on their hydration gel. The human popped a piece of gum into his mouth, gave a lazy wave, and announced, "Yo, name's Florida Man. This here's sarcasm. We're here to spice things up." The crocodile, sarcasm, growled, loudly, deeply, like thunder, rumbling inside a meat grinder. The chamber fell into stunned silence. Security hesitated. The rules didn't exactly cover feral Earth reptiles in the Senate chamber. Florida Man didn't stop. He strolled confidently down the center aisle, chewing his gum and nodding at the crowd like he owned the place. "Where do I sit?" he asked, gesturing at the circular council floor. The High Chancellor, visibly rattled for the first time in millennia, muttered, "We were not expecting a representative from Earth." Florida Man grinned. "Exactly. That's what makes this fun." The Galactic Senate had never seen chaos like this before, and it was just getting started. The Galactic Senate had hosted many strange guests over the centuries, beings made of gas, hive minds in jars, and once, even a time-looped version of a delegate who debated himself for 3 hours. But nothing compared to this. Florida Man stood barefoot on polished galactic marble, sarcasm's claws clicking beside him. Delegates leaned forward, trying to comprehend what they were seeing. His tank top had a faded logo that read, "Gator Wrestling Champion, 2032. His shades reflected the ornate ceiling of the chamber, as if mocking its grandeur. "Is that a Terran predator?" a senator whispered. "No, it's worse," another replied. "It's a human, with confidence." Florida Man smacked his gum and pointed up at the hovering chancellor. "We came here to represent Earth. I heard y'all were having issues, and thought, hey, why not bring a little bite to diplomacy?" Sarcasm hissed, loudly. A low, gurgling growl that made a gelatin-based lifeform in the front row quiver into goo. Security drones activated, buzzing nervously in midair, awaiting orders. But the Chancellor, now blinking rapidly in half a dozen frequencies, hesitated. This wasn't war. It wasn't even a violation. Technically, the human hadn't broken any rules yet. Earth has no formal diplomatic presence in this chamber, the Chancellor said cautiously. Florida Man shrugged. "Now we do." He walked straight to the open central platform, dragging sarcasm behind him, and stood where only the galaxy's highest diplomats had ever spoken. Sarcasm yawned, flashing rows of prehistoric teeth. No one dared stop him. The senators glanced at one another, unsure whether this was a protest, a prank, or the beginning of a species-level threat. The human wasn't scared, he wasn't even sweating. And somehow, that made him the most dangerous creature in the room. As Florida Man stood confidently on the Senate floor, sarcasm resting by his side like a leathery guardian, the Galactic Senate erupted into murmurs, whispers, and untranslated growls. Several delegates leaned toward their translators, demanding an explanation. Is this typical human behavior? Why is he smiling in a room full of enemies? He brought a predator on a leash made of adhesive strips. How are they not extinct yet? A senator from the Varnuk Dominion stood, his voice deep and full of condescension. This is why humans are not taken seriously. They are disorganized, irrational, emotionally unstable. Another delegate, a crystalline entity from the Dalari Alliance, added, "They cry when overwhelmed. They laugh during crises. Their physiology is so fragile, it breaks from sound waves or excess hydration, and they brought a lizard." Florida man, seemingly unaware of, or intentionally ignoring, his judgment, casually stretched. "Y'all talking about us? Cool. Just making sure you're paying attention." He tossed a raw chicken leg from his pocket towards Sarcasm, who snapped it up mid-air without missing a beat. Crunch. The senators recoiled again. To many in the chamber, humans were still considered a low-tier species, usually spacefaring, biologically volatile, prone to bizarre behavior, and capable of destroying their own environment before lunch. They were emotional to the point of madness, and illogical in the face of danger. But now, one of them stood here, unarmed, unarmored, unbothered, and grinning. He wasn't playing by the rules. He wasn't even pretending to understand them, and for the first time in centuries, the Senate chamber didn't know what would happen next. One thing was certain: underestimating humans might have just become a galactic mistake. With all eyes on him, Florida man casually lowered his sunglasses and looked around the chamber like he was sizing up a neighborhood barbecue. He raised one hand and pointed to himself. "Florida man, no fancy title, no badge, no committee, just me." Then he pointed to the crocodile lying beside him, looking disturbingly comfortable on the polished marble. "This beast? Meet Sarcasm. And yes, that's his real name. Because he's got the biting kind." A few senators exchanged bewildered glances. "Was that humor? I brought him for support," Florida man continued. "He gets nervous in large political gatherings." Sarcasm growled menacingly at a senator who had dared to blink too loudly. Laughter, nervous and awkward, rippled through some sectors of the chamber. A few senators who had visited Earth tried to explain. Florida is a region on Earth. It's known for unpredictable weather and even more unpredictable people. It's where humans do things like throw alligators through restaurant windows, for fun. The Chancellor cleared his throat, or its light equivalent. "You are not a registered ambassador. Why are you here?" Florida man shrugged. "Because someone needed to be. And because Earth is way more interesting than you'll give us credit for. You think we're weird. We know we're weird. We've made it into an art." Sarcasm hissed approvingly, tongue flicking at a nearby delegate. The chamber didn't know whether to laugh, run, or call for emergency lockdown. But one thing was clear. This wasn't a joke that would pass quietly. This was a cultural incident waiting to happen. Florida man winked. "Don't worry. We're here for the lolsies." And somewhere, in the darkest corners of space, fate snorted soda out its nose. The chamber was a patchwork of confusion. Some delegates were frozen in stunned silence, their expressions unreadable, or unreadable, in the case of beings with 12 eyeballs and no face. Others erupted into whispered arguments with their aides. Is this performance art? Is Earth testing psychological warfare? Should we prepare for a species-level mental breakdown? The senator from ZARNATHI4, a race of cold-blooded, logic-driven beings, stood up and declared in his gravelly monotone. "This violates every known protocol of interstellar diplomacy," to which Florida man replied, without missing a beat. "Protocols are like pants, optional in Florida." A ripple of laughter broke out across the upper balcony, from the more culturally curious delegates who had studied human memes. One even whispered, "He is what they call based." But not everyone was amused. The Trivak ambassador, a jellyfish-like creature suspended in a tank of neon fluid, began to pulse an emergency red hue. "This is not diplomacy, this is chaos." Florida man bowed theatrically. "Thank you, I work hard at it." Sarcasm thumped his tail once on the floor with a deep echo, almost like applause, or threat. The security drones twitched nervously. Meanwhile, the Chancellor tapped something into a glowing orb, consulting intergalactic laws. Unfortunately, there was nothing, absolutely nothing in the bylaws about what to do when a human brings a crocodile to a legislative event. Behind the stoic faces of many delegates, something new began to stir. Curiosity. This wasn't war. This wasn't peace either. It was something entirely new. And though many were too proud to admit it, they kind of wanted to see what happened next. Without any warning, no formal motion, no translator clearance, not even a polite cough. Florida man clapped his hands loudly. "All right, Sarcasm. Show 'em your parliamentary procedure." The crocodile's eyes lit up. With a powerful lurch, Sarcasm leapt forward toward the Senate floor. Not in rage, not in attack, but with the unbothered confidence of a creature that had absolutely no business being there, and knew it. Delegates screamed, "Light for!" Some leapt backward. Others shielded their heads with ceremonial scrolls. A few pulled out non-lethal stunners but hesitated, unsure whether firing on a pet would start an interspecies incident. Sarcasm didn't bite anyone. Not yet. Instead, he skidded to a halt in front of a podium, reared up and sat down like a well-trained dog. Florida Man pointed at him proudly. "See? Better trained than half your politicians." Somewhere in the upper balconies, a diplomatic intern snorted audibly. Then Florida Man pulled something from his back pocket, a plastic garden flamingo, and slammed it on the center console like a judge's gavel. "I call this hearing to order. Article 1. You'll need more fun." One senator fainted. Another started live streaming on the galactic intranet. "This is historical," she whispered. "Insane. But historical." The Chancellor's light-based form pulsed rapidly, possibly equivalent to an aneurysm. Security drones slowly moved in, surrounding the human and his reptilian co-counsel. One made a beep that translated to, "Please don't make us." Florida Man leaned on the podium, calm as the eye of a hurricane. "Y'all brought structure. I brought spice." For a moment, no one spoke. Sarcasm hissed approvingly. Then, somewhere near the back, applause. One delegate. Then two. Then laughter. And just like that, chaos became the main agenda. As Florida Man playfully commanded Sarcasm to bite only the corrupt ones, a few senior alien delegates exchanged nervous glances. One tapped his neural implant and whispered, "Pull up the Earth files, the panic footage." Instantly, flickering holograms appeared in front of the Varnock and Dalari delegations, clips compiled by alien observation drones over the past century. These were Earth surveillance reels labeled Human Reactions to Stress. The images were chaotic, absurd, and alarming. One clip showed humans punching vending machines that ate their change. Another showed a woman yelling at a goose in a park while throwing bread in dramatic rage. There was footage of someone in a storm, sliding down a flooded street on a plastic pool float, laughing the entire way. To the aliens it looked like mass psychological breakdown. "Are they always like this when faced with adversity?" a delegate asked. "Yes," came the grim reply. "But they survive. Even thrive," said another. "They rebuild cities, cure diseases, joke at funerals. They grieve, then meme it. Somehow, they adapt. What the aliens once thought was weakness, the screaming, the crying, the nonsensical coping, now started to look like something else entirely. Resilience. Humans didn't break the way others did, they bent, like rubber. And then came back harder. Florida Man, in that moment, was no anomaly. He was an exaggerated expression of a truth hidden deep in human behavior. When things get tough, humans panic. But when the panic ends, they do the impossible. Sarcasm, meanwhile, burped loudly. Florida Man tossed him another raw chicken leg and smiled. "You know, stress is just the universe's way of seeing if you've got jokes." A few aliens suddenly understood. Maybe humor wasn't a weakness. Maybe it was armor. Maybe it was armor. Back on the Senate floor, a group of delegates expected the human to cower once security drones circled in. Surely, now that consequences loomed, he would fold like the emotional, unstable creature they believed him to be. But Florida Man didn't even flinch. He leaned casually against the console, twirling a pen he clearly stole from someone's desk. "Raina Mana. You want to arrest me? Go ahead. But first, Sarcasm here's gonna need due process. I hear Crocs get a defense trial, right?" The drones hesitated. The chamber held its breath, and Florida Man smirked. "Didn't think so. In a chamber where fear silenced most species, Florida Man was laughing. Relaxed. Radiating the same wild, unshakable energy that made him charge through hurricanes back on Earth, with a beer in one hand and a traffic cone on his head. Courage wasn't supposed to look like this. It wasn't polished or strategic. It was raw, loud, chaotic and genuine, and it was starting to spread. A human ambassador, the actual one, wearing a proper suit and holding a stack of prepared remarks, stood slowly. Inspired by Florida Man's brazenness, he tore off his tie and tossed aside his script. "Leisure. I second the motion for fun," he said, stepping forward. The chamber gasped again. Another human rose. Then another. Their courage wasn't aggressive, it was contagious. And in that moment, aliens saw something they'd missed for centuries. Yes, humans were emotional. Yes, they were unpredictable. Bows. But they weren't cowards. They were just brave in their own bizarre, reckless way. Especially when you least expected it. And sometimes, the strangest warrior is the one who reminds you what courage really looks like. While all eyes remained fixed on Florida Man, a few astute observers began watching his companion more closely. Sarcasm, the crocodile, wasn't just a mindless beast on a leash. He was behaving with uncanny timing, awareness, and attitude. He didn't growl randomly. He growled when certain senators interrupted. Wallaby, he didn't move aimlessly. He slid deliberately to the Chancellor's dais and rested his chin on the step, staring directly into the translucent being's glowing core. A senator from the insectoid Wizik hive leaned forward. "That creature, it understands the political hierarchy." Another delegate added, "I believe it just vetoed a motion with a tail swipe." Florida Man scratched sarcasm's back. "Don't be fooled. He acts like a lizard, but deep down, he's a full-blown agent of chaos." Sarcasm blinked slowly, and then licked his own eyeball. Security logs showed no aggression, no unprovoked attacks, no wild lunges. In fact, the crocodile seemed to obey non-verbal cues. A nod from Florida Man. A snapped finger. A dramatic pause in conversation. Sarcasm played along, as if reading the room. And the room was increasingly unsettled. It was becoming clear. Sarcasm wasn't just a pet. He was a co-star. Some whispered that Earth might have genetically enhanced him. Others feared he was an ancient god in disguise. But most agreed on one thing. The crocodile was smarter than it had any right to be. "He represents human diplomacy better than any ambassador we've met," one alien muttered. And strangely many nodded. He was unpredictable, direct, full of bite. And always listening. In a galaxy obsessed with order, sarcasm was the perfect symbol of Earth's true strength. Controlled chaos. And now, that chaos was sitting quietly, waiting for its next cue. As the Senate struggled to regain order, Florida Man leaned into the silence like a master showman. He tapped the mic on the central podium, then shouted, "Is this thing on? Galactic Senate, make some noise!" A few delegates winced. One jelly-like being rippled in distress. Another asked, "Is he performing?" Yes. Yes, he was. But it wasn't random. Florida Man's jokes weren't just for laughs. They were weapons. And he wielded them with surgical recklessness. When the senator from Cygnus Prime began ranting about order and structure, Florida Man nodded solemnly, then pulled out a kazoo and played the Earth Anthem, badly. When an ambassador from Zeta Helix 9 accused him of disrespecting tradition, he sighed and said, "Buddy, where I'm from, tradition means frying butter at a county fair. You want order? Buy alphabet soup." Laughter broke through the crowd again, and this time it lingered. Because what the Senate was starting to realize was that this wasn't madness for its own sake. This was disruption with purpose. Florida Man was doing something no ambassador ever dared. Disarming the room, not with force but with unpredictability. Humor threw them off their rehearsed speeches. Jokes dissolved diplomatic tension like acid on protocol. Even the Chancellor's glow dimmed for a moment, as if amused. "Why are his insults making the room friendlier?" asked a stunned analyst. "Because," another replied, He's not mocking them. He's mocking fear. That's a power move. It was no longer just spectacle. Florida Man had seized control of the most powerful political chamber in the galaxy, using nothing but confidence, chaos, and a crocodile with good comedic timing. And deep down, many delegates were starting to enjoy it. Florida Man wasn't alone anymore. At first, the few human diplomats scattered around the Senate floor had watched in horror. This barefoot anomaly, with a crocodile and a kazoo, was ruining centuries of galactic reputation in real time. But then, something shifted. They saw how the other delegates stopped laughing at humans and started laughing with them. At you live Gazoo, they saw fear replaced with fascination. By Fucher. And more importantly, they saw respect beginning to flicker. A young human envoy stood up. She was from the Interstellar Trade Division, dressed in a crisp suit, protocol manual clutched tightly in her hand. She hesitated, then dropped the manual and stepped forward. "I vote in support of the Earth delegation," she said loudly. Florida Man gave her a thumbs up and a wink. Sarcasm sneezed approvingly. Another human joined, then another. Scientists, engineers, observers, aides, they stood in solidarity, some awkwardly, some confidently. One guy held a coffee mug that said, "I paused my video game for this." And for the first time, humanity didn't look fractured or foolish. Lortai. It looked fearless. Lort. Together, they weren't polished or perfect. They didn't recite scripts or walk in sync. But they stood tall in their messiness, proud of their weirdness, their humor, and their utterly unfiltered courage. "This is the human spirit," someone whispered from the Vex quadrant. "Not war, not strategy, just showing up, no matter how absurd." The Galactic Senate, long used to robotic precision, found itself captivated by this spontaneous, chaotic display of unity. And Florida Man, watching his fellow humans rise one by one, leaned into the mic and said, "See, we're not just crazy, we're contagious." In the upper tiers of the Senate, the elite observers of the galactic think tanks whispered among themselves. Holograms flickered, notes were taken, translation orbs spun at maximum speed. This wasn't how humans were described in the archives. Not even close. "Emotionally unstable," one analyst muttered, scrolling through outdated data. "Prone to irrational behavior," another added, rereading an old report about humans crying during movies. But everything unfolding before them contradicted those assumptions. The humans weren't just surviving in this alien environment, they were thriving. Their unpredictability wasn't a liability, it was power. The delegate from the Varnok Dominion, once rigid in his condemnation, slowly nodded. "They are not erratic. They are adaptive." A crustacean-like ambassador from the Sal Empire chimed in. "They use humor as defense. They bond through absurdity. It makes them unpredictable and unified." Even the Chancellor, still glowing but slightly dimmer, finally spoke. "What we perceived as weakness may in fact be evolution. They endure because they bend. They endure because they break rules." Delegates from ancient empires, beings who had fought wars for millennia, now watched Florida Man like he was a battlefield phenomenon. He wasn't commanding armies. He wasn't using weapons. But he was doing something just as dangerous. He was changing minds. One senator from the cold-blooded, logic-bound Iskari leaned back and said aloud, "If this is how humans fight, I don't want to face them in war." Florida Man, still chewing gum, gave a casual peace sign. Sarcasm belched, tail thudding with just enough timing to feel like punctuation. And across the chamber, alien assumptions began to unravel. As Florida Man leaned back on the podium like he was sunbathing at a beach bar, a quiet transmission rippled through the Senate's data cloud, a stream of archived Earth footage, now reanalyzed with new context. Scenes flashed across dozens of translator spheres and vision discs. Humans standing ankle-deep in floodwater, handing out food. Firefighters running toward burning buildings without hesitation. Doctors in war zones, treating both allies and enemies. Footage of devastation, hurricanes, earthquakes, wars, played alongside images of laughter, street dancing, and impromptu musical performances in the rubble. "They rebuild faster than we predict," whispered a strategist from the Dalari Council. "And they laugh while doing it," replied another. One clip showed a man in a flamingo suit rescuing kittens during a riot. Another featured a grandmother baking cookies in a storm shelter while reading poetry. Alien leaders stared, awestruck. Humans didn't hide from chaos. They waded into it, barefoot, laughing, sometimes shirtless, occasionally on fire, but always moving forward. Florida Man and sarcasm weren't exceptions. They were just extreme examples. One scholar spoke into her record log. It is no longer accurate to categorize humans as weak due to their emotionality. They process trauma differently. They absorb pain and produce community. The more they studied humans, the more the picture changed. They didn't collapse under pressure. They exploded outward, creating, rebuilding, joking, surviving. Florida Man wasn't a breakdown. He was a breakthrough. Their resilience, the Chancellor noted, is chaotic, but undeniable. And in that moment, the Galactic Senate began to realize. Humans weren't unstable. They were just unshakable, in the weirdest, loudest, most unpredictable ways imaginable. It happened in an instant. One of the more traditionalist senators, a towering armored brute from the Mulgrath coalition, had heard enough. Red-faced and thunderous, he stomped forward, ignoring protocol and security. "This mockery has gone on long enough," he bellowed. "Remove this creature and his pet." He pointed a clawed finger at Florida Man. Sarcasm tilted his head, slowly, then let out a low, guttural growl that echoed off the chamber walls. Florida Man didn't move. He just smiled and said calmly, "I'd rethink that step, buddy." The Mulgrath delegate snarled and took another step forward, claws raised, posture aggressive. And that's when sarcasm launched. Crawled, not in a frenzy, not blindly. With surgical speed, he leapt forward, snapped his powerful jaws around the senator's leg armor, and stopped. No blood, no broken bones, just pressure, just dominance. The senator froze, breathing hard. The room went dead silent. No blown. Sarcasm held his grip for 2 full seconds, then gently let go and slithered back to Florida Man's side, tail flicking like punctuation. The message was clear. Don't mistake teeth for violence. The chamber erupted into stunned murmurs. Even the most conservative delegates couldn't deny the symbolism. A creature they thought mindless had shown restraint, control, purpose, and the human. He hadn't ordered anything. The bond between man and beast was mutual, tactical. That wasn't an attack, the Iskari ambassador whispered. That was a statement. Security did nothing. For the first time in decades, they didn't have to. Sarcasm became more than a sideshow. More than a companion. He was now a living metaphor of Earth's unpredictable, wild courage, wrapped in thick skin and sharper wit. The crocodile had bitten without blood, and in doing so, he'd left a mark deeper than teeth. The chamber remained still long after sarcasm returned to his spot beside Florida Man. No alarms, no drones, no retaliation. For the first time, the Galactic Senate, the most rigid and tradition-bound institution in the known universe, found itself rethinking everything. The Mulgrath senator sat back down without protest, staring at his still intact leg, as if re-evaluating his entire worldview. The Chancellor's glow dimmed to a soft, thoughtful hue. "Perhaps," the Chancellor said slowly, "we have been looking at humanity the wrong way." A senator from the crystalline Hilari Confederacy stood and spoke with surprising emotion. "I once believed humans were unstable, but I now believe they are elastic. They don't shatter, they snap back." Another delegate from the insectoid Thrix collective tapped a limb against their translation pad and added, "They frighten us not because they're dangerous, but because they don't fear the absurd, they weaponize it." Florida Man blew a gum bubble. Sarcasm burped softly. Neither said a word. Yet the silence spoke volumes. Naivuka sarcasm bird. A ripple of light passed through the chamber as the vote request was initiated. A rare motion not for war or trade, but for recognition. One by one, the lights lit up green. "Earth is to be formally recognized," the Chancellor announced, "as a full voice in this Senate, with all rights, protections, and warnings attached." Laughter followed that last part, but it wasn't mocking, it was respect. Florida Man gave a thumbs up and finally spoke. Told y'all we weren't just memes and mayhem. Sarcasm nodded, and in that moment, humanity went from footnote to full chapter in the galactic story. Not because they were powerful, but because they were real. With the Senate still buzzing from the historic vote, Florida Man stepped forward to the center podium once again. Not swaggering this time, but calm, grounded, even thoughtful. He took off his sunglasses and tucked them into his tank top. Look, I know we're weird, he began. We wrestle gators for fun, deep fry things we shouldn't, and name our kids after weather patterns. A few delegates chuckled. But that weirdness, that's part of what makes us us. We laugh when it hurts. We dance in the rain, even when the roof's caved in. We mess up a lot, but somehow, we keep showing up. He paused, glancing at Sarcasm, who blinked slowly like an ancient philosopher in scaly armor. You think we're chaotic, and you're right, but you know what chaos breeds? Change. The room quieted. When something breaks, we don't stare at the pieces. We tape it together, give it a name, and call it art. When things go bad, we make jokes. Not because we don't care. Because caring hurts. And joking? That's how we fight back. Delegates leaned in. Some even nodded. You've seen our worst. But still, we laugh. Still, we love. Still, we stand up again. He raised a hand. We're not warriors. We're not conquerors. We're survivors with attitude, and we carry on one joke at a time. A moment of silence. Then, applause. Not just polite claps. Genuine, thunderous approval. Somewhere near the back, a three-headed delegate stood up and shouted, Earth! 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 Florida Man gave a grin. Sarcasm hissed like a rock star ending a concert. And in that moment, the galaxy didn't just see a man with a crocodile. They saw humanity. Messy. Emotional. Resilient. And stronger than anyone had imagined. Later that cycle, long after the applause faded and the lights dimmed, the Senate chambers remained half full. Not because of duty, but because many delegates simply stayed. They weren't ready to leave. Across the tiers, representatives from ancient star empires and young coalitions sat in reflective silence, surrounded by reams of data, media clips, and updated intelligence briefs from Earth. But this time the information was being viewed through a new lens. The emotional instability, once flagged as a threat, was now being reassessed as depth. The illogical behavior once mocked was being reinterpreted as a form of creativity. They are not primitive, said a Varnock tactician, eyes scanning decades of footage. They are improvisational. They are not chaotic, said a Hilary sociologist. They are agile. They are not reckless, added a Delari historian. They are courageous in their own way. A new term began circulating in the Senate's closed discussion forums: cognitive elasticity. The ability to feel deeply, adapt rapidly, and endure absurdity, all while smiling. This wasn't a military capability or a technological marvel. It was something more rare, psychological evolution, and they hadn't even needed a war to prove it, just a man in swim shorts and a crocodile named Sarcasm. Even the Chancellor, who had witnessed countless civilizations rise and fall, addressed their council of advisors. Earth may not follow our order, but they offer something no one else can: chaos with conscience, madness with heart. And as the Chancellor's light dimmed to contemplative blue, a universal truth became clear. Humans weren't broken, they were just built differently. And in that difference, the galaxy had found something new. Something unpredictable, powerful, and oddly hopeful. The next day, under the glow of 3 orbiting suns and the shimmer of the open starfield above, the Galactic Senate reconvened. But this time, the mood was entirely different. There was no tension, no condescension, no chuckles at Earth's expense, Instead, the chamber was full of expectation, respect, even anticipation. The Chancellor's platform hovered silently for a long moment before it pulsed a steady golden hue, the signal for historic declarations. "Let it be entered into record," the Chancellor's voice echoed, "that the Terran species, represented, albeit unconventionally, by citizen Florida Man and his companion Sarcasm, is hereby granted full diplomatic status within this body." A pause. "They are unpredictable, emotional, unrefined." Another pause, followed by a smile in their tone, "and entirely unforgettable." Cheers erupted from the human side of the chamber. Delegates from dozens of worlds, many who'd never spoken to humans before, now approached Florida Man for autographs, photos, and cultural exchange requests. One ambassador even asked if he could shake Sarcasm's tail. Sarcasm allowed it, barely. The Chancellor continued, "May Earth's seat in this chamber serve as a reminder that diplomacy takes many forms. Some formal, some wild, and some wearing sunglasses indoors." Florida Man stood and gave a lazy salute, sunglasses back on his face. "Glad to be here, just don't expect me to wear shoes." Laughter echoed from species who didn't even have mouths. And just like that, humanity went from galactic meme to official member of the universe's most powerful assembly. Not through war, not through politics, but through being exactly what they were. Ridiculous, heartfelt, chaotic and brave. And yes, with a crocodile in tow. The night after Earth's official recognition, the Galactic Senate did something it had never done before. V-Day. It threw a party. Not a diplomatic dinner. Not a ceremonial gathering with polite claps and dry speeches. No, this was a real celebration. Loud music, alien beverages, cross-species karaoke. There were glittering drones projecting floating disco constellations above the chamber. And in the middle of it all, Florida Man danced barefoot on a hover table. Sarcasm bobbed his head to the beat, a party hat slightly askew on his scaly skull. "This is diplomacy done right." Florida Man hollered, sipping something that was probably illegal in 3-star systems. Delegates from across the galaxy were laughing together, many for the first time. The ambassador from the Hillary Confederacy attempted the Macarena. The jellyfish diplomat from Zorb 6 invented an entirely new dance involving levitation and slime trails. A Varnok general clinked glasses with a human engineer. "I used to fear your kind," he admitted. "That's okay," she replied with a smile. "Most of us fear us too." They both laughed. It wasn't just joy in the room. It was release. The tension of old prejudices, broken. The stiffness of formality, shattered. All thanks to a human who walked into the most sacred place in the galaxy, with a crocodile and a joke. The Chancellor, floating above it all, looked down on the dancing crowd and whispered to an aide. "Perhaps humor is the highest form of diplomacy." And as the music swelled and species mingled freely, enemies turned into allies, strangers into friends, the galaxy began to feel a little smaller, a little messier. A lot more fun, and in the center of it all was Earth, weird, wild and finally, welcome. Years later, in a museum orbiting the galactic core, a strange exhibit drew millions of visitors every cycle. Pixeler, it wasn't made of gold or ancient artifacts. It wasn't a weapon or a treaty. It was a faded tank top, a pair of aviator sunglasses, and a life-sized hologram of a man with wild eyes and an untamed grin, standing beside a crocodile wearing ceremonial Senate medals. The plaque read, "Florida Man and Sarcasm, the day Earth bit back." Historians now taught his entrance as a defining moment in interstellar relations. Not because it was planned, not because it was clean, Shelpla, but because it was real. My pa, Florida Man, never wrote a speech. He never held office. He never wore shoes to a meeting. Akis. But he showed the galaxy that humanity wasn't just a civilization. Not bicultural. It was a personality. Not bicultural. A force of nature. Not bicultural. An unpredictable, emotional storm that could walk into the most serious place in the universe, cause utter confusion, and leave behind unity. Sarcasm, now semi-retired, lived in a luxury swamp habitat on Venus Prime, occasionally brought out for diplomatic ceremonies, usually wearing sunglasses of his own. Florida Man. No one knew exactly where he went. Some said he became an intergalactic wrestler. Others claimed he started a space food truck. One rumor insisted he rode a comet bare-handed into a solar flare, just to see if it tickled. But his legacy remained. Whenever galactic debates grew too tense, someone would mention Earth. Someone would chuckle, and someone else would whisper, "Remember the bite?" In a galaxy once obsessed with perfection, Florida Man proved that sometimes the future belongs to the messy, to the bold, to the ones who walk in barefoot and change everything.